Good evening. It's a really pleasure to me to be with you in this event. I will share my screen with you for starting. Well, thanks a lot to Helénica Political Science Association and hosts and organizers in this event. This lecture, we're going to talk about trivialization and fake news and discourse analysis in the Colombian case. Well, my name is Carlos David Martínez Ramírez. I'm teacher, psychologist, researcher in Servicio Nacional de Aprendizaje SENA. This is a public education institute in Colombia. It's known as an vocational and educational training institution. It's known too as a third education and as a technological education institution. Well, let's start. Aristotle underlined the excitation of the feelings reduced by speech. In the case of classical Greek philosophers, involving pathos was a rhetoric method used by philosophers and sophists. The instructions for IQ in a democratic environment were not that for seeking the truth all the time. The main goal was to access to the power, to the police control. And first, document human civilizations, advanced knowledge was totally managed by the king or pharaoh and his or her entourage. His or her closer entourage. In the Enlightenment period, with an easier access to books, for example, there was a huge hope for knowledge to make free humankind from the short's monopoly of the truth. More recently, in dictatorial periods, media were or are constrained by dictators' political agendas. In the 20th century, Hermann Chomsky underlined that, in contrast to the standard conception of the media as cantankerous, obstinate, and ubiquitous in their search for truth, the societal purpose of the media is to inculcate and defend the economic, social, and political agenda of privileged groups that dominate the domestic society and the state. The Colombian case is very interesting. Let's take a view of a fast background. I entitled this part like Political Action Without Political Ideas. Well, in the 19th and 20th centuries, there was a bipartisan political control in Colombia, conservative and liberal parties. In 1991, a new constitution opened democracy to new parties and opinion movements, bringing the opportunity to create new parties and participation to people with different ideologies. This democracy opening brought a huge proliferation of political parties, involving, in theory, new opportunities for citizens' participations. Although there were more options for democracy participation, the operation of voting turned out to be a difficult issue. From two traditional parties, a voting process became to involve until 96 parties. In this way, it was difficult even to find the preferred candidate in the electoral card, especially in a country where most of the people don't have too much reading habits. And here we can talk about critical reading too. In any way, in political theory, it's better the pluralism than not democratic politeas or based in political unity. A real problem arrived in 21st century with this sort of personalization in political relations. There are many variables related with it: traditional political parties losing power, a new rise of caudillismo as it is called in Latin America, similar to Warlords, a sort of charismatic leadership based in personal characteristics, and debates with personal agendas rather than ideas discussions. Following Weber, this is a sort of pre-modern organization. Obviously, politicians always have personal agendas, presented in the name of a superior good for the nation or supposing to representing political parties. What Colombia experienced was a sort of losing the sense of politics. Some examples are the labels for new movements like Uribismo for the followers of Albert Uribe, Santismo for the followers of Juan Manuel Santos. New parties for personal interest, instead of being institutions for ideology representations. The political phenomenon is more complex. Many analysts suggest that political parties losing sense started with the Frente Nacional, when conservative and liberal parties agreed to share the power every presidential period, while in other countries in the region had to deal with military dictatorships. Reacting with welfare politics, Colombia's violence was solved by an agreement between conservative and liberal elites in Europe. This event made a deep insight in the way of doing politics in Colombia, where even nowadays it appears the most important is having electoral and management power rather than ideas. Although it's pretty extended in democratic countries around the world, relations in power between two political parties with relatively different ideologies, the Colombian case killed democracy by avoiding discussions and consequently surrendering to the challenge of building a deliberative democracy and according power distribution without any ideas debate, with the excuse of stopping violence. The bureaucracy, understood nowadays, has a technical meaning, following Weber, related with accurate planning, execution, and assessment, scientific and technical management. In Colombia, the most extended sense for bureaucracy is involving with management and electoral power for engaged people in official jobs, institutions, and winning elections. We can say there is not a legal rational legitimacy. More recently, one example of losing sense in political fundamentals are agreements with guerrillas has been understood outside of Colombia as a Cold War finishing, like right versus left spectrums. But inside of Colombia, most of the people do not see a political agenda, neither an ideology in the guerrillas, in the left spectrum, in fact. Well, here we are able to talk about discourse analysis and a phenomenon in Colombia, the trivialization and fake news. While scientific attitude tends to underline contradictions in every thesis, political engagement involves commitment, following Weber. In niche dissertation about morality and success, he says success is supposed to be a substitute for greater validity. Well, exactly, he says. Success often bestows upon an act the whole honest lust of the good conscience, A further casts the shadow of pangs of conscience over the most estimable deed. Follows the familiar practice of the politician who thinks, only give me success. If I have success, I shall also have brought every honest soul over to my side, and made myself honest in my own eyes too. In the recent history of Colombia, mass media and social networks have played a central role spreading discourse, tending to present complex phenomena as banalities and fake news. An example of this is the extended use of the word parapolitics, for meaning relations between armed criminal bands and active political elites, with interest infiltrations in the legislative agenda and justice process. As paramilitary groups appear for attack guerrillas, for fighting guerrillas, many politicians defend the democratic principle of the weapons monopoly by the state, and others, especially in the ultra-right spectrum, argue it has been a natural reaction due to loss effective of the governments for fighting guerrillas. The banalization of this serious phenomenon has involved spreading discourses about recent judicial processes instead of explore the structural and historical causes of the conflicts. Similar situation has been experienced with the use of the word "band-crime" for meaning criminal bands involved with narcos, with traffic, with drug dealing. In this discourse, mass media focuses on new criminal activities instead of describe commercial and political connections. Neither the denomination changing for all groups keeping in criminal activities. During the government of President Juan Manuel Santos, just finishing, the strategy used by oppositions to the peace process with guerrillas was the disinformation and circulation of fake news, with information directed to specific targets. In this way, the lower classes were told that grandparents will have cut off from their pensions, that Colombia will suffer a similar fate to Venezuela, that subsidies will be removed to give more money to demobilize guerrillas, and the higher class were told that lands will be taken away. Religious groups were told that a gender ideology or gender theory, as you say in Europe, this sort of market targeting for choosing discourse, especially using social networks according to social conditions and beliefs, was very well used in Colombia in 2016 plebiscite, as did Trump in USA elections for the same year. There was a discourse fragmentation and a sort of selective communication seeking for passion rather than thinking, using data analysis and different kind of resources, human talent, money, and in the case in USA even from Russia, curiously an old enemy and at the same time a new friend, according to some USA companies managers and recent statements. Well, manipulation is used for many ideological spectrums and parties. In the Colombian case, people promoting agreements with guerrillas movements inside the government, even President Juan Manuel Santos by himself had told, using mass media, that if agreements were not supported by people in plebiscite, guerrilla fighters were going to use weapons against. This was a fake news tending to fight fear with fear. Well, finishing now, Colombia is living a democracy commotion. There's a sort of new populism and caudillismus. That means charismatic leadership based in personal characteristics, a sort of pre-modern organization as we saw. Traditional political parties almost disappear. From the second half of 20th century, political power has been based in naturalized elite agreements, and even in 19th century are the roots of these ways of doing politics in the traditions of hacendados or hacienda owners, landlords, forcing to vote their own slaves. The recent history of Colombia, the distortive function of particular discourse has involved trivialization and information concealment, even the spread of fake news from different ideologies spectrums. A way for dealing with this phenomenon is promoting critical reading and critical thinking from public education policies. But for this kind of educational projects, it's very important to face many obstacles in stakeholders' interest in keeping the status quo, as well as the love of sense in the ways of doing politics. In an epistemological context, it's important to make difference between rejecting unification of discourse around one truth, like postmodernity, and thinking communication by strategy and economic survival rather than disciplinarily and a sort of operationalism, and just avoiding true issues seeking for success or a sort of ultra-pragmatism appealing to emotions. Well, thanks a lot for this invitation, and I hope, well, once again, thanks a lot for this invitation, and I hope to have a good time there.